Hello and welcome to Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder, ADHD, Understanding ADHD, the three areas of diversity and their effect on learning and behaviour. This is Module 2A and it's a range of Eyfs specific interventions for younger children with ADHD. The reason it's 2A, I have delivered a Module 2. Module 2 is for a range of ages. 2A is an additional module for people for people who are working with younger children. So this is all about using specific interventions for young children. Okay. My name's Andrew and I'm a TEDx speaker. I've delivered From Disability to Superpowers. You can find that on YouTube. I also delivered the Bamford Lecture, Creating Autism-Friendly Audiology Clinics. I deliver short courses at Bishop Grosseteste University, Lincoln, and the University of Lincoln. I'm a forensic special educational needs and disability consultant. That means that I work as an expert witness in court cases. I do training, I do observations, and I'm a keynote speaker at a range of conferences. I've got a wide conference profile. I'm also, for the benefit of this particular workshop and these ADHD workshops, I'm an adult with diagnosed ADHD. So, if you want to be in touch with me, a range of ways you can get me on all the major social medias. I'm probably most active on Twitter and Instagram, maybe LinkedIn, but do feel free to get hold of me on any of these. You can email me, andrew@peoplefirsteducation.com, and you can also contact me through my website, peoplefirsteducation.com. So I'm out there, and I'd be delighted to hear from you. So let's talk about ADHD, and in particular, let's talk about ADHD in the early years. Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder, or as I call it, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Impulsive Disorder, and the reason I call it that is because there are three types of ADHD, and those three types of ADHD are the combined type, inattention impulsivity, hyperactive impulsive. The combined type has inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. You'll notice that impulsivity runs through all the three different types of ADHD, and so therefore I like it to be remembered in its name. So instead of attention deficit hyperactive disorder, you might call it Adhd, putting that in impulsive behaviours in there. And as I've shown you before, great way to remember this is to see this circular representation: inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity, and being aware that within that inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity, you can have two or three of those characteristics, but they must include impulsivity. So inattention impulsive, hyperactive impulsive, or inattention impulsive and hyperactive. So that's the way we do it. So inattention and hyperactivity is not ADHD. So what is ADHD? ADHD is a neurological condition caused by the ineffective functioning of the neurotransmitters in the frontal lobe of the brain. Okay, and this part of the brain where there is the ineffective functioning is the bit that governs attention, impulsivity, and motor activity. So this is the bit that keeps you focused. This is the bit that helps you make good decisions, and this is the bit that helps you to relax and sit still, etc., etc., etc. So that's where it is: neurotransmitters in the frontal lobe of the brain. Now, interestingly, ADHD in the early years, ADHD is often misunderstood as a behavioural condition, the naughty disease. But actually, this is only true. Behavioural problems are only in 1/3 of people with ADHD, and those those behavioural problems, the other 2/3 of people with ADHD don't have those behavioural problems. And actually, we know that only 1/3 of people with ADHD get the help they need. And it wouldn't be too difficult to imagine that those 1/3 that get the help they need are the ones that are presenting with challenging behaviour. And so, if you know that diagram there, that little pie chart there, is quite a sort of a good way of seeing. Actually, it's a small proportion of people with ADHD that present with challenging behaviours, and one would wonder how many neurotypical people present with challenging behaviours. Let's guess maybe it's 1/3. In the early years onwards, children with ADHD struggle with many areas of development. Yeah, it is a developmental condition as well as a neurological one. And here's some of the issues that you might have. Now, I have to say here that people with ADHD, like any condition, if you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD. But there will be probably poor concentration, finding it difficult to stay focused on things, impulsive behaviours, and I love the phrase, by the time I figure out what I'm going to do, I've already done it. Potential speech, language or communication difficulties, and poorly developed social skills. And again, this is all to do with this frontal lobe of the brain. Now, I work in a lot of early years environments where children are maybe not necessarily diagnosed with ADHD. Getting a diagnosis of ADHD in early years can be quite difficult. And so they may not have a diagnosis, but they clearly are presenting as ADHD. Now, this has got some serious considerations. Number one is, according to the Special Educational Needs and Disability Codes of Practice, from the age of 0 to 25, that people, we have to put the interventions in for people who present as may having a condition. So just because a child doesn't have a diagnosis of ADHD, if they are presenting as though they've got ADHD, then we have a legal responsibility to put in interventions and make reasonable adjustments for those children. And so and a reasonable adjustment is basically that. It has to be something reasonable that you can do for that person. One of the interesting things I find that in early years ADHD is not whether they are accessing the curriculum, but whether they are ready to learn. Are they ready to engage with the learning in the classroom? Are they in a position where they can take this in? Now, and this is both long and short-term learning. So one of the things that concerns me at the moment is I'm a massive advocate of IT in the classroom. I do not believe IT is the future of education. It is the here and now of education. And I think there's a huge discrepancy between what we're doing in schools and what we're doing out of school with IT. However, I'm very aware that we have a huge amount of young people, very young people, who are using tablets, mobile phones, iPads, etc., and to a lesser extent laptops, and they are one of their sole areas of learning. Now, I'm fine with them using this thing, but this is not a substitute for adult parent caregiver interaction. And so one of the problems I have when I'm in a school and an early years setting is not, is that child learning, is that child accessing the curriculum, but are they ready? Or do we have to teach them? Do we have to teach them how to play? Do we teach them how to interact? So lots to be considering there. Other issues of children in early years ADHD, they will have difficulty waiting in turn. Yeah, queuing up is not the default setting for a person with ADHD. Waiting their turn, sharing, and working with others of a similar age. They're more likely to be drawn to adults, actually, and older children. But yeah, waiting in turn is a difficult one. Sharing is a difficult one. Working with the children of a similar age. Just want to go back to that waiting in turn. Some of you will be aware that you can buy passes for children with ADHD at theme parks that allow those children to jump the queue or to come through things a bit quickly. And while I see the benefit of those for some children, I do not see the benefit of those for ADHD, because actually a child with ADHD, I think, really needs to learn to queue. So if you see a child queuing up at a theme park playing on a device, the gut reaction may be to say, oh, look at that child, they can't leave them alone, they're on those devices. And actually what we ought to be saying is, look at that child, they're using that device as a strategy to make the queue go down a bit quicker. And it's great because they're not falling out with their siblings or complaining or climbing or whatever it might be. So, you know, it's worth considering that. And I do understand there are exceptions to that rule. Children with ADHD in the early years, as with later on, they're inclined to interrupt. They can butt into conversations and games. They can be bossy, and they can take over. They have fantastic ideas, and I'm going to do this, and we want to do that. And other children might find that they're feeling a little bit dominated. They're often described as completely and constantly on the go. There is no stopping these. Think about the Duracell monkey. You know, that never stops, and it's going on way after all the other clapping monkeys have stopped, and they are fearless. And you know, and these are the kids that will indulge in fearless activities. So in the early years, this is very much when children are experimenting with life. This is very much the time when they're even more fearless, and they're even more bossy, and they're even more interrupting and dominating. Generally, children with ADHD will underperform. They will underperform partly because the learning and teaching is not geared towards their learning styles. They will underperform because they will be expected to concentrate for great long periods of time, and they will underperform because if they're not interested, they really just won't take it in. They don't learn from their mistakes. They will completely keep repeating the same errors over and over again. They will have short-term memory problems, and their behaviours will be inconsistent with their child expectations of development. So if you get your Sheridan out, birth to 5 years, they won't be hitting some of the landmarks in that text or those similar texts. Okay. Young children, they're going through massive, huge learning curve, and they all need to be helped with regulating their behaviour. But what you will find is with a child with ADHD, they will need this more than most. When you think in early years, the steepness of that learning curve, and the fact that the development of the ADHD child is going to be so much behind those other children, they're going to need that extra bit of support. The other thing about behaviour is children with ADHD do possess impulsive behaviours. They will have impulsive actions, and actually because of those impulsive actions, that will cause them to behave in certain ways that are deemed antisocial, unexpected, and more difficult than the other children in that class. Okay, it can be difficult to recognise the signs that indicate this condition in this stage in the early years. I've often said this, young children are designed for bouncing, jumping, climbing and falling and all those things. And so if you take a child with short attention span, impulsive act, lively behaviour, obviously they're all like that at that age, or you hope they're all like that. We want them to be like that. And so getting a diagnosis for a child with ADHD can be very, very difficult. And, you know, even in my role, I've got this kind of paradoxical view, because on one side, I don't want a child to miss out on a diagnosis they genuinely need. But on the other side, when people say, oh, you know, as it happened to me recently in a class of 18, they got 9 identified as potential ADHD in a reception class. My mind is going, are they ADHD or are they just children of that age? So it is a really difficult call to make. My personal position on this is, at any age, flag it up, record it, put the interventions in place, because when they get to 7 years old, you may need that evidence, because it's all about evidence. So do flag it up, do raise it as a concern, and do put the interventions in place. But we do know only a very small amount of children get a diagnosis of ADHD in those early years settings. Okay. In actual fact, what's more likely to happen is that the diagnosis will be achieved during the school years a bit later on, when what we have as environmental demands, academic demands, behavioural demands, less exploration in learning, less learning through play, less freedom, and that's when ADHD really shines through, and those children really come across as being different to the other children that you're working with. And so that's when those stark differences happen, and that's when you go, actually, this child has got ADHD. Also, as they get older and they go through school, we have less adult support, and ADHD does benefit very much from small group work, one-to-one work. And so, you know, you are going to get issues where they've got less adult support, and again, their behaviours, their interactions and their achievements become so much more obviously different to the other children in the class. During that period, during the early years, as they go on, as they get older, the gap starts to widen. And so during that period, the behaviours will be becoming more inconsistent with age-related expectations. If you were to say they are 30% behind with behavioural and social age-related expectations, well, at the age of 6, they're like a 4-year-old. At the 3, they're like a 2-year-old. These are noticeable gaps, but they're not as noticeable as, say, at the age of 18, they are the behaviours of a 12-year-old. So you can see, or even 12, the behaviours of an 8-year-old. And so as you can see, as that gap widens, it becomes far much more easier to recognise this, and therefore far easier to seek a diagnosis. So therefore, in the early years settings, you've got to be a little bit canny. Staff need to recognise the signs, which I'm going through with you today. And it's not difficult to get this sort of information at this early part of what those signs are. They need to put the strategy in place to support the children, as well as building and maintaining confidence and self-esteem. People who are different feel different, and their self-esteem is generally not good. So we want those children to feel better about themselves, and we want those children to have good self-esteem. It's okay to be different. As I've said many times, ADHD is not a death sentence. In many ways, channeled in the right directions, it can be a superpower. Okay, but in those early years settings, as with every other setting, working with a child with ADHD can be challenging. It is challenging. They are different, and they will behave differently, and there will be challenging behaviour for, as I say, at least a third of those, and you've probably only identified the third with the challenging behaviour. So we need to review routines, look at routines and say, are these working for them? Where are the hotspots? Behavioural hotspots, emotional hotspots, social hotspots, and try to have less of those and more of the areas that work, more of what works, less of what doesn't. We need to look at the environment. Is this environment good for them? Are they able to move about? People with ADHD love to be getting moving about. That's that hyperactivity, or certainly for a large amount of people with ADHD. Are they able to move about? Are the activities there good for them? Have you got lots of things that they can take apart and put back together again? That's a real ADHD thing. So you might have lots of Lego and that sort of thing. Are the resources appropriate to their needs? Consider the periods of time they spend outdoors. Are there safe options for them to climb or to build, or to, to get into that sandpit with the blocks? Or, I'm not recommending this, but the metaphor is, this is the child on a BMX bike, on a space hopper, on a trampoline. I mean, that obviously we wouldn't do that, but that's the kind of excitement they seek. They seek that excitement of being able to do lots and lots of different things. And then we also want to look at the indoor environment. Now, I'm going to show you a picture in a moment, but before I do, seating plans are maximising attention, hugely important. So if you want a child to pay attention, maybe you've got story time going on, you want that child with their back to the window. You want that child close to you, because otherwise they're never going to enjoy the story. They're going to be looking out the window, or if they're not close to you, they're at the back, they're going to be playing with their friends, and you've all seen it, the little girls plaiting hair, the little boys with the Velcro on their shoes, all that kind of stuff. And so if you want them to enjoy that story, get them to the front, get them with the back to the window, away from doors and distractions and things like that, so that you can get them. Have a look at this. Now, I have used this particular slide in another one of my presentations about which is best for children, and what we say is which one of these is best for children learning in the average, say, primary or secondary classroom. And people will say, oh, the one where they're getting to move about, the one where they're getting to do change and things like that. Absolutely, completely agree. And then I say, which one do you think I see more of? And they go, oh, the one where they're sitting in chairs facing the front with a talky teacher. Absolutely, I see more of that as well. However, what I'm asking you now is to say, in an early years foundation setting, when children are not quite ready to learn, we might end up where we have periods of time where they do have seated times. Yes, not like that. That's like a secondary school. But seated times with, maybe just 5-10 minutes at different parts of the day where the teacher is talking to them in a controlled environment in order to teach them how to exercise a little bit of self-control. And then off we go and we do our, a child-centered learning and child-initiated learning, etc. But there needs to be a mix. Times are changing, and we have got a lot of kids coming up that are not ready to learn and that can't really cope. And again, I'm going around classrooms, early years settings, and you've got all the different activities, and they'll go and they'll say, okay, we've got the Lego here, so sweep it on the floor, let's walk up and see something else. So they're building bricks, or throw a few of these around and go and do something else, because they haven't learned to play. And so it's not just learning through play, it's learning to play. We also want to look at overstimulation and understimulation, getting the balance right. That environment there is too crowded, it's too busy, there's too much going on, there's too much stuff hanging from the ceilings, and you maybe think, well, that's a really good environment for an early years setting. It's about getting that balance right, as I've said. You want inspiring interactions and you want things there, but what you don't want is too much there. And with ADHD, if you overstimulate those children with ADHD, you'll probably end up with some challenging behaviour, or at very least, difficult to concentrate. Having said that, if you understimulate them, you'll have exactly the same situation. So where the answer is somewhere in the middle, and where that middle is actually dependent on each individual child with ADHD. Every child is different, but overstimulation will not help, neither will understimulation. Have a look at this one. This one's an interesting one. You know, I can't actually make sense of this. Somebody's been feeling very arty, and they've got all that stuff up on the board there, and they've got numbers, and it's just chaos as far as I can see. And what might look inspiring to a teacher, you know, to a child, they might look at this and go, I've no idea what's going on. For a child with ADHD who has difficulty with executive functioning and difficulty with organisation skills, neurologically having difficulties with organisation skills, this is going to be far worse for them. And we need to make things more obvious for them. Yes, we want children to learn, but we also want to give them that basis in which to learn. Nobody's learning anything there. Nobody. Why can't you focus? Again, that chaotic situation. Maybe you go home from work in the evening and maybe you do whatever you've got to do. You maybe, if you've got children, you cook the tea for the children and off they go to bed and what have you. And maybe you sit down a little bit later and you have yourself a glass of wine, a beer, or a gin and tonic, or a cup of tea even. And you sit there and maybe you light a few candles. You turn off the lights, you light a few candles. You might tidy up the children's toys, again, if you've got children. Tidy up your own toys if you don't have children, because you're trying to bring the sensory environment down. And then you're going to watch a bit of TV. And so, and the point I'm making there is, you know, we all have needs to bring the sensory environment down sometimes. I always think turning the lights off, lighting the candles is so you don't see the dirt. But anyway, we do that stuff, we bring the setting down. And actually, that might be something you want to do in your learning environment. For example, you know, on a nice day, do you also need the lights on in the classroom? Is that a bit too sensory overload? You know, have you got a projector going in one corner of the room for children doing interactive activities on a whiteboard? So then if you've got a projector going, do you need lights on? Do you need music playing? Do you? I don't know. I'm not convinced you do all the time. I'm very much a fan of when music is played in the classroom, that music should be focused and explicit to a learning task, not just playing in the background. And it can all be too much. And so when we say, why can't you focus? Really, the answer's there on the screen, why they can't focus. There's way too much going on. Okay. In the earliest setting, if you want to look at hotspots, and if you want to find out where things go wrong for these children, then throughout the day, keep watching them, write things down. Every time something goes wrong, write it down, but don't be negative. Every time something goes right, put that down on paper as well. And then you can get back to that more what works, less of what doesn't thing again. Highlight the times of the day that children find challenging. Is it just before lunch when they're getting hungry? Neuropeptide Y kicking in. You know, and it's a bit of hangry. Is it in the mornings? Maybe they're tired. Maybe it's in the afternoons just before going home time. Maybe in your setting where some children are getting picked up at different times by parents, you know, because there is that sort of gradual decreasing in numbers. Maybe you find that when there's less children there, maybe they're doing better. And that might be something you say, well, let's do some activities with them where there are less. You want to make adaptations. So if there's games and food and things like that, if you're going to have waiting queues, you know, reduce those waiting times. If they need support during activities, give them that support. And as I say, really important, difficult times of the day. That will tell you loads and loads of stuff. That will give you lots and lots of information. And also, as some of your preschool settings have got different people there on different days, being aware of that. Who do they bounce off in a positive way? Who do they clash with? Okay. If you're working with ADHD, you need to be, okay, calm, positive and consistent. ADHD comes with a lot of self-esteem difficulties, and actually, you know, you need to be positive with those children. They are good at things. They are good at things that neurotypical are not good at. I am good at things that neurotypical people are not. Neurotypical things, you things, you. I am good at things that neurotypical people are not good at, and but I'm less good at other things. And so, you know, we need to be positive about that. We need to be calm, because a lot of their actions that they do, a lot of things that their behaviours are out of their control. And we also need to be consistent. You know, if we laugh at the child, you know, doing a silly dance or something like that, and they do it again next day because they think it's going to get your attention in a really positive way, you've got to laugh again, because actually they, you know, they've seen that as a positive, and they'll get confused if you don't. The child may often feel or be out of control. You know, it's not dissimilar to an autism meltdown, and particularly with some of those impulsive behaviours, we may have a situation where those children just aren't in control of those situations. So please do not escalate, and do please avoid confrontation. I'm a big fan of Laurel and Hardy, and often Laurel and Hardy start with situations that are very normal situations, and then one person does something to annoy somebody else, and then that person annoys them back, and then a friend gets involved, and we soon have that escalation with the giant custard pie fight. This is an image from a Laurel and Hardy film where it starts off where they're taking two young women on a boat trip, and it ends up with everybody getting annoyed with them. There's this huge fight on the boat trip, and hey, what happens? The boat sinks. We don't want the boat to sink. So really, that's your metaphor. You know, it's like a custard pie fight. The only thing that ever happens in a custard pie fight is people get covered in custard pie. Post any difficulties, after any difficulties, ensure a fresh start and do not return to it. You know, phrases I don't want to hear and phrases they don't want to hear and you don't want to say. Oh, I hope you're in a better mood today. Yeah, I hope we're feeling a little bit more friendly today. Oh, well, I hope we're not going to see, you know, or whatever it is. We don't need it. And I used to have a slide in one of my workshops that said a fresh start every day. And a teacher in a secondary school corrected me. Actually, she was a Senko. She said, no, Andrew, not a fresh start every day. A fresh start every lesson. Excuse me. And I did actually there and then change the slide and kept it that way. Yeah. And quite often with ADHD, that child may not understand what they're doing and why they've done it before or during the incident, you know. And so the other question is, you know, why did you do that? Well, they'll say, I don't know. Trust them. They probably don't know. They may realise afterwards, but questioning them, interrogating them, as I often call it, will only add to their confusion, add to their distress, and make them feel even more uncomfortable. And then whilst we're on that subject, one of the things, he's just naughty. She knows what she's doing. She knows exactly what she's doing. Yeah. They knew, you know, that, well, actually, they probably don't know. And it's the way that we deal with it. And again, you know, I look at that picture there, and it's that thrill-seeking ADHD person. You know, it's the way we handle it. Imagine that person's in your setting, yeah, without the beard and without the being over 40. Right. Strategies and interventions. So we've got potentials, hotspots, not dissimilar to autism, but the similarities kind of change when we put the interventions in place. But group situations, yeah, a person with ADHD will often and pretty much always stand out in a group. Social situations, because we have those those lesser developed social skills. Taking turns, again, waiting to take turns is really hard when you've got ADHD. Cooperation, working with other people. Quite often people with ADHD, they want to take over the activity and be in charge of the activity. Listening is not the chosen way for them. ADHD's chosen form of processing is through the eyes. They are visual processors, and they will respond through the mouth, in through the eyes, out through the mouth. And so using your visual interventions is a much better way with ADHD. Sharing, again, not something that they do terribly well. And then learning to recognize the feelings of others, how other people feel. And so we need to do work on all those things. And that's your hidden curriculum, isn't it? That's the stuff you want to be sitting down with those kids and doing role play and activities based around that. So how do we do that? Some good tools that we can use there. I was just checking my timings, by the way. Wasn't getting distracted. Oh, look, a rabbit. Effective tools. There are lots and lots of books out there about talking about social skills and sharing and all those things, and understanding how other people feel. Using puppets. Puppets are fantastic. Social stories and any visual interventions are useful. They will support the developmental skills that these kids need. And so that kind of thing. Also, you might watch some PSE type videos. There's some lovely sort of cartoons and things like that to talk about people's actions. And when you're doing story time, just normal story time, to have those intersections to say, how did the character feel here? Why do you think the character did that? And, you know, what could we have done to help with that character? And so lots and lots of things you can do. It's about never missing the opportunity to do a social intervention. When attempting to gain a child with ADHD's attention, speak to them directly. Matthew, come over here to me, please, for a moment. Use their name. Use attention-grabbing techniques. See the chap in the picture there has got quite a good attention-grabbing technique. I would certainly be interested to know what's going on there. This is the same sort of strategy that we might use with separation anxiety when we have a child who struggles to come into school. If you've got an attention-grabbing technique such as a silly hat or a game or an activity or something that ties in with their special interests, then that's the time to be getting those out, because that's the sort of thing that will get their attention. Be interested to find out who goes away and makes one of those colander helmets. I think I might. When we are looking at learning to share and take turns, you might want to provide more than one of something. So in this particular in this particular incident, we've got an example. We've got the Fisher-Price pirate ship, and we might have a child that particularly likes that Fisher-Price pirate ship. Then you might want to get a second one, because if that's the thing that makes them calm and that's the thing that makes them happy, then you want them to have access to that. But whilst you do want them to have access to that, you also want the other children to have access to it. So when you're looking at your budget, what you can get for this child or that child's interest, don't automatically write off the prospect of getting an extra thing of something that they like. It makes sense. It's just meeting their needs. Rules need to be differentiated. I've got a really good example that isn't about the early years, but the metaphor is a really good one. I was working with a young man in a school, and he was in year 6, and there was a reward system in place of a special jacket they used to get to wear, and he always wanted to earn that jacket. And but his behaviours, whilst up to this point, he never really did get to wear this jacket. But what was interesting was he had ADHD, and he had difficulty coping, and he had difficulty concentrating, and he had difficulty channeling his behaviours. But he would do it as best he could. So he'd come into school at 9 o'clock in the morning, and he would be absolutely at the best he possibly could. But he'd always lose it about 10 minutes before playtime. And all the good work that he'd done right up to that moment wasn't recognised. And so, you know, I would like to see differentiated expectations and differentiated rules. And also for him, we could have done so much for him. We could have taken him out for a little break halfway through the lesson, bring him back. We could have set him timers, if you can concentrate for an hour, you know, all those things. But that didn't happen, and he didn't succeed. Because if you set rules that they can't live to, actually neurologically just can't, then they're not going to succeed. Keep an eye on signs of the children becoming overstimulated. You will notice that, and bring it down. Regular movement breaks will help. Obviously, in the early years settings, you hope they can get around and do lots of movements anyway. But yeah, regular movement breaks are helpful for all children with ADHD. Because they're little and you do lots of exciting things with them, they might get tired very, very quickly. And if they get tired very, very quickly, they might get overexcited, and then they lose their self-control. And then you actually get the opposite. You get an increased overactivity. And obviously, you know, it's also about not just lots of movement breaks, it's lots of other breaks that they might be able to access, including sitting down, having a rest, having a nap, all those sorts of things. Okay. Keeping them busy. Creating opportunities to keep younger children with ADHD busy in a positive way. Very interesting to me anyway, and I hope it is to you, that we've had, one of the things that I do find in some early years settings, including reception classes, is a lack of a lack of community spirit in that classroom. And one of the things that I do and to build that community spirit and to teach those children really important community and social skills is to give everyone jobs and responsibilities. Now, jobs and responsibilities for a person with ADHD is a really good thing to do, because A, it keeps them busy, B, it keeps them something to be proud of, C, it builds their self-esteem if they feel that they can do well at something, D, you can be telling that child how well they're doing, so again we get an even bigger boost to self-esteem. Jobs and responsibilities, absolutely brilliant, and I would really recommend it all the time. I would also say that to keep them busy, you want a little bit of variation. Now, it might be that your carousel learning is going really well, but maybe you want to put timers on them and say, right, 5 minutes per activity, move on. A lot of people would put longer on there, but I would say 5 minutes is really good for a child with ADHD. Remember, a child with ADHD, their attention span is their age plus a minute, take away a third. So a 5-year-old child with ADHD has got the attention span of 4 minutes. That's really important to remember that. Sending them for messages is good, giving them something to do. Monitor roles, they may be the one that hands out the fruit, they may be the one that makes sure that the drinks are on the, the cups are on the tables, they may be the one that makes sure everyone's got a pencil, or that they help teacher put things out. All of these are really positive interventions to help with hyperactivity. This is a colleague of mine, Jane, and this she's using is a wobbly foot thing. It's called a fidgety feet, and what you do is you put your feet on it, and it moves about. It's kind of, you don't stand on them. It's not for balancing on, and it moves about under your feet. I always say to people, children, when they use this thing, please, don't do it, don't work it, let it do the work. And so just put your feet there, and you'll find that it just keeps you that little bit. It helps with that little bit of movement without disturbing other young people in the classroom, in the setting. So it's a really nice little resource, that. And the reason I like this particular picture, I've used it in one of my other presentations for these modules, is I like it because that lady fell asleep. She fell asleep because it was so calming and so relaxing. Supporting strategies and interventions, instill routine. Routine, really good for people with ADHD. People with ADHD, young people with ADHD, they've got short-term memory problems, and so a routine helps them do things in the right order. And so routine, be consistent and have consistent routines. But you be consistent. You need to be predictable. You need to be the one that they can rely on, the one that they go, yeah, I know exactly what's happening now. I can trust this person. And so please do, support them with being calm, with being predictable, with their routines. And then that helps the child be also calm, to also take control of the situation. Always have a visual timetable. I've told you so many times. It's the first thing I look for in any environment, and try to keep waiting times to a minimum. Waiting times are very difficult for people with ADHD. Hanging around and waiting just doesn't fit with their needs. Okay, so I'd like to look at the benefits of using some visuals with ADHD, and using visuals as a supplement to your spoken language, your auditory verbal techniques. So a couple of little things that is quite good here. So this is a now and next board, which I should have one here. And what they've done, they put their stickers on here. They come with, what you get is, if I can just show you, they come with these little pockets, and you'd put something in there. So my list of jobs to do is wake up, get dressed, eat toast, brush hair, brush teeth, go to the toilet. These are all really good ones because you don't necessarily need the words, although putting the words with a really good picture is a good plan, because what you're doing there, you're making children visually aware of what the symbol of the words look like in comparison to the actual act. So that's a bit, we'll talk about that when we do things on dyslexia, but labelling things is a really good plan at any age. In actual fact, there's been some research recently to say that children learn to read quicker if they have subtitles up on their TV shows on the television. So we put it in there, and when we've done it, we move it across to there, and we can do these things. Now, what's interesting about that is there's also that element of kinesthesia that people with ADHD do enjoy. They like moving stuff about because it's all about moving about. Right. Using a range of preemptive and responsive intervention to assist Eyfs children in self-regulating behaviours. We've got our boards. I'm not advertising our boards. You can do things like this yourself. Visual stories, visual timetables, and respond react boards. It says there, I will how you after the timetable. I will show you. I think that was going to be, I've already shown you. So, but yeah, respond react is very, very good. Using pictures all the time. Using lists. Lists can come in many forms. Visual timetables, other prompts for young learners with ADHD to help with their memory and organisation difficulties. Absolutely, yes. Visual timetables, that's a really lovely visual timetable there. That's quite a simple one where you might just use 2 or 3 activities on a day, and then the rest of the day is your own. But that's a really good one. We also want to look at timetabling strategies for younger children with ADHD that maybe you only put up now and next, and things like that, so that they don't get overwhelmed by what's going on there. We want to be looking at carousel learning. Is it necessarily the best for those children? Is free choice the best, or is it better to give them a timetabled activity list? It might well be, because they might struggle with attention deficit and in these little sort of moving around activities. So you might want to give them something more suitable to their needs that helps them with their attention deficit. A few other little things that you want to know. Speak clearly in short sentences. Remember, they are not auditory verbal processors most of the time. And so if you're going to speak, keep it clear, keep it explicit, and keep it short. Base conversations around the child's interests. If you want to get their attention, talk to them about a thing they're interested in. Show that you are interested. If you do that, that motivates them. And then one last thing that I really want to talk about here is your own use of power. Children with ADHD may feel that they're being picked on sometimes. And it's very easy to get agitated with children with ADHD when they behave in a different way to the other children. Just be cautious, because if you are seen to be maybe a little bit stern with a child and a little bit not picking on them, but just keeping an eye on them all the time, it may cause other children or the other children to try and curry favour with you by being unpleasant to that child. Not saying you're being unpleasant, but the other children may be unpleasant. So think about that. Be aware of the message that you are sending out. Thank you for listening. There's the ADHD triad up there again. What I would like to say is, for your directed task, I want you to think about, if you're not in a position to observe children at the moment, perhaps you're in a position to think about 3 areas or 3 actions that you've seen children participate in that have been what you would consider negative, and 1 under each heading. So 1 under inattention, 1 under impulsivity, and 1 under hyperactivity. And I would love you to share that with me in any of the modes that I've shared with you at the beginning. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you again very soon, I hope.